oh, we haven't got that in the budget. It does make you think, well, yeah, but at the start of the year, you didn't know this was an option. So how would you have even put it in the budget? And that's quite an interesting argument to have with people. And I guess it's kind of defining what's the budget there for. Yeah, your budget is essentially your best guess on what you're going to be doing in terms of revenue and therefore expenses to make it all work.
Hello and welcome to the Move Your Business Forward podcast. These talks are hosted by Boll, founder of Evoke Management and CEO of International Leaders UK. We'll be talking with experts from both these companies about issues that affect SME companies today.
Welcome to this episode of the Move Your Business Forward podcast. We're carrying along some of the themes around the big squeeze at the moment. People impacted by inflationary pressure, trying to recruit and retain staff, and some of the supply chain issues that are still impacting a lot of businesses right now. Today, I'm joined with Phil and Colin, both experienced commercial finance directors who both work with a range of companies. And what we're going to talk about today is just sharing a few of those things that are going to be relevant to SMEs around the concept of cost control. So anyone running a business, anyone looking at their numbers, looking at their finances, I think it's really important to have a handle on their costs and understand some things around how best to go about controlling those costs. So it's a big topic, and we only got about 20 minutes or so to talk about this. Colin, for you, what springs to mind when it comes to cost control for you?
Well, I'm from an IT background, so my favourite saying is shelfware. Software that you buy that sits on the shelf. And don't we all know that personally? Because you've got your Spotify, Apple TV. I mean, their list is just flipping endless, isn't it? And companies are no different. And actually, the biggest mistake that people make is they stick something on direct debit. And direct debits just get forgotten. You know, even the accounts department, they just automate the payment off the direct debit. And everyone's got shelfware. And it's boring. But every so often, you should just go through your direct debits and standing orders and work out what the hell you're buying. And actually, are you still using it? It seemed like a good idea at the time. Went on direct debit, and you probably even forgot about it. So that's kind of low-hanging fruit. Just go for them. Go for shelfware.
And Phil, what's your immediate kind of thoughts when it comes to cost control?
I definitely agree with Colin in terms of there's so much that people tend to sign up for it, and I can speak for having worked for business over the years that relish in people signing up for direct debits, because generally it's not something that people always identify with. But yeah, I think getting your starting point is basically any kind of control exercise. It's got to be kind of accessing the information. So ideally you've got a tool set, Xero, QuickBooks, something like that, that's basically allowing you to see the information, and it's nicely portrayed. In businesses that are not moved onto a platform, that's slightly more difficult because you've got to kind of scroll through various Excel spreadsheets and receipts, and bank statements and stuff like that. But having access to the information, I think, is a starting point. And then probably this kind of, I think, as Colin says, there's some stuff that you can do as just part of a very simple process. It's very easy just to look through your bank statements or through your statements and see what you're subscribing to and you don't use. But then beyond that, I would just say prioritize. It's like, it start with the once you've unchecked all the simple stuff, it's then just prioritize in terms of what's your biggest ticket items, what are you spending money on, and then start from there.
Sure, no, it makes sense. I think one of the things I see businesses do is they take on software with a good intention, and then people find other bits of software, or certain people like using one bit of software and not other bits, or not everyone uses the same bit, and it's trying to work out how to keep everyone happy without just spending on things that aren't consistently used or aren't used by everybody. And everyone does things in different ways are just inefficient.
Software is a classic one, though, because you do find that basically management have chosen a lovely piece of shiny software that in reality is wonderful if you use it. Whereas not necessarily, just because you bought it doesn't necessarily want to use it. So I think in addition to kind of looking through what you're paying for is asking some questions about how things are being used. And that obviously applies to many things, but software is a very easy one to be able to validate.
Yeah. Colin, any thoughts on that in terms of just getting people, keeping everyone happy, but at the same time putting in some rules around what software people should be using?
Yes, and the other thing is it's really keep looking at it. So I mean, make sure you've got a decent approval system in house. So you know, Zero, QuickBooks, Expensify, Approval Max. There's any number of them, and make the person who wants to buy the software put in a case and make somebody else then approve it, and then it's in, and then you've forgotten about it. So refresh that every few months because it's been approved. Why not go through a reapproval process? So the originator has to reconsider it and the approver has to reapprove it. And a bill should not go onto, I'm a Zero user, a bill should not go onto Zero unless it's gone through an approval max type process. It is process.
It's quite interesting. When I used to work in big firms, you used to have the concept of a new business request, which was like we want to invest in this, and then you have to put a big case together, and it spins around a whole bunch of managers and departments, and it starts off, and 6 months later, it's kind of still spinning around a bunch of people. SMEs have the luxury of you can probably pick something, and it's paid for that afternoon. The concept of putting in a proposal, a new bit of software proposal, or some kind of business case for this kind of thing is important, but it's just making sure it's not overcomplicated or burdensome. What would you be thinking should be in that, Colin, if you're going to advise a business on approaching that?
That's really hard because every business is so different. I mean, I kind of got off the tangent. The budget is a dangerous thing. Someone's given a budget, and you bet they're going to spend their budget. And you know, it's classic. You know, everyone knows in the quarter, everyone has a good month of sales because someone's got a budget to use up. So be really wary of giving someone a budget. Review that damn thing on a regular basis. Their budget spend was supposed to produce some ROI. If the ROI is there, then pull that budget sharpish.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's part of it.
Wasn't the answer to the question, but it's an answer.
So in that kind of business case is, we want to invest in this. It's going to cost this, but what's the ROI expected from it? And
I mean, trade shows, the marketing department, of course, that's where people go around worrying about cost control. And they cut the cost of the cleaner of an evening, and they go from a trade show and spend tens of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds. The trade show ROI has got to be really on it. No, you can't have a gold-plated stand. You might have the budget, but I don't think that revenue is going to come in. And as soon as it looks like the revenue is not going to come in, then pull the budgets back.
Yeah.
Budget sets at the beginning of the year, and you guarantee within a quarter the budget's probably wrong.
Yeah. I think I often hear this as well, and it sometimes comes when I'm doing selling to people is, we haven't got that in the budget. It does make you think, well, at the start of the year, you didn't know this was an option. So how would you have even put it in the budget? And that's quite an interesting argument to have with people. And I guess it's kind of defining what's the budget there for. Your budget is essentially your best guess on what you're going to be doing in terms of revenue and therefore expenses to make it all work. But there are things that land that you didn't know about. So of course they're not going to be in the budget. So how do you deal with those things, do you think?
I'd say they're trying to sell to other people. Try and sell to other people. Don't fall to the line it's not in budget, because there's always a budget. You can always find some money.
Yeah.
There's always, if you're trying to sell, don't fall for that one. And again, in house, I kind of take the budget at the beginning of the year with a pinch of salt within no time at all. It's a guide. It's not how you should run a business.
So what were you
I was going to say business. Even in the current environment is specifically the case where things change, week to week. So the idea that you knew at the start of the year exactly what you can spend, and therefore that should in some way, it's a guide. I think, as Colin says, you don't want to, by the end of the year, you're expecting that to change into flux and to take into account things that are going to happen. And while it's generally a good idea that you don't automatically go out and buy every shiny new toy and blow the budget, there is certainly, I think there's always that thing of basically making allowances for changes in circumstance and changes in, if the price of electricity goes up, well, I mean, yes, you can take that into account and you could potentially reduce costs somewhere else. But some cases there are things that you just need to accept, and therefore reflecting that in a revision, whether you put it in a forecast or a budget or anything else, I think is important.
Yeah, no, 100%. What other approaches will you take to cost control? And one thing I'm conscious of is with everything we've gone through over the last 3 years, the pandemic, you know, all kinds of other challenges around costs going up. People have kind of gone to town in terms of trying to reduce cost out of the business, and some businesses are running as lean as possible. Do you think, how would you approach, right, is there still more cost cutting to be done, or you go, do you know what, let's just focus on other aspects of the business and stop hammering cost all the time, because it's just unhealthy and annoys everyone in the business, so he feels just beaten by constant cost cutting?
I think there is definitely a concept about believing in what you're aiming to achieve first and foremost, and it's there are some aspects to it which is understanding, managing costs. Controlling always sounds a bit kind of negative. Managing costs and making sure that you know what you're spending your money on and you're making a proactive decision on it. That's fair enough. I think there's definitely a point where I think there are some cases, whether it's for an investment decision or whether there are short-term decisions that often can be quite painful in terms of cutting costs, whether that's in resources or just general on costs in general. But I think you've always got to think about the long term, your long term objectives. If your long term objectives, if you lose sight of those, you can make some immediate, like cutting corners, cutting costs here and there. One is it tends to piss everyone off, and you tend to find that people, your employees and your team tend to be demotivated for it. They'll understand if you're doing it for the right reasons, but if you're constantly doing it with no eye to that end goal and what you're aiming to achieve, and it feels like nitpicking, then I don't think it's counterproductive. I think managing it upfront and knowingly, and I hate to say getting people involved, but there is an aspect of making people sure that people actually understand why you're saying we need to make sure we monitor what we spend. So
yeah, I think the saying is, isn't it? It's a fool and their gold are easily parted, but the true fool never spends their gold. And just cut. Times you should actually spend your damn money.
Yeah.
And let the finance department loose with no imagination, dare I say it. They'll just say, spend their money, spend their money, spend their money. And actually, you know what? It's not really what way to run a business. That is short-termism that you'll get payback in the medium long term with no revenue.
Well, the whole concept of cost management is, it's trying to link through how that cost relates to the revenue you're generating. And you can't cut the cost, or it's just unhealthy to keep cutting the cost. How do you create more margin by adjusting your pricing, your revenue strategy to make sure you've got better margin to cover everything? And I think that's something that everyone needs to keep looking at as well, because in some cases it's not just the reducing the cost, it's just creating a better margin and making sure you're making the appropriate margin on that cost base that you've got.
So again, another silly saying, every company needs a dreamer, a doer, and a cynic, right? And the finance guy is the cynic, and the dreamer and the doer will come up with the imaginative ideas, and it's the cynic's job to pull them down. Is to pull them down and criticize, but not to just cut. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. And then simply find that people are just like, no.
So
you've got to see through the good and the bad.
The other thing that I think being in a finance director role can really help is approach to how you negotiate these things, right? How you actually go and talk to suppliers, deal with procurement process to make sure you're getting the best deal in the first place. Have you got any top tips? I know, Phil, you've worked with a number of big corporates and seen a bunch of things go well and not so well. What would be your top tips in terms of negotiating better terms with suppliers of goods that's going to impact your margin and cost?
So I think one of the things that my preference is to be to have a sensible conversation with your suppliers. Having worked on both sides of the equation and working for large companies where someone suggests that you as a small business should take a 25% price cut because of some, ultimately so that business continue making the same level of profits without necessarily is a very difficult thing to do. I think having a a sensible conversation with your suppliers and identifying, most suppliers will work very hard. They like the relationship as well. So I think having a sensible conversation. So if you need to cut costs because you can't afford to put up prices and or you have, there is that balance. If you need to do it, I think having an upfront conversation with your suppliers and actually talking to them about what other people pay for the same service is introducing some evidence into it. I think when I've had a couple of times when people have said to me, it's like, oh well, we could get this, we can buy this service X% cheaper if we get it from John down the road, who's basically who's not a real company, and or he's basically selling a knockoff product, whatever it might be. But the idea that you're just going to reduce prices and you're just going to be able to do it without some kind of impact, it's not helpful, and I don't think it builds good relationships with your suppliers. So having a sensible conversation saying, well, listen, we need to cut costs, we have to be able to manage X, Y, and Z, what can you do to help? And or, this is the reason why we think that the price needs to come down. That's a sensible thing. Often they'll come up with ideas. So for example, maybe it's a volume discount or something else, or some other way for them to be able to handle it. But having a conversation with them, I think, is part of it.
Yeah.
But you can be cheeky and just ask for it. You never know. So there are some times where if someone gives me a 25% discount without a conversation, I'm seriously questioning whether they've been overcharging me for whatever period of the relationship. It's like, how could you have afforded to be able to take a 25% cut? So,
yeah,
I think the key word in there is conversation. I think you say conversation is personal relationship at this point. Do me a favor, can you help me out? That's the usual sort of negotiation tactics, and you can't do that on an email. I'm broke, can you cut your costs? Well, that email's going straight in the bin, isn't it?
Yeah.
Got to get onto them personally.
And I think it's that conversation then talking about long-term engagement relationship as well. Because if you can work together with a supplier, understanding where both sides are coming from in terms of the margin squeeze, or where you can actually help each other, that's just going to keep the business flowing for longer and longer, and both sides of that are going to gain, right? Your supplier is going to gain from you doing more business with them, and ideally you can make more profit and continue to be growing a business and add into that as well. So yeah, conversation, relationship, and looking for long-term partnerships there as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the same, that thing about relationships triggers back to the earlier thing we were saying about, if you ask once, if you're constantly basically cutting costs and you're going, well, we got to cut another 5% this month, or what can we do on the, if you're constantly asking, whether it's your staff or whether it's your suppliers, or you're constantly telling your customers you got to put up the price, it doesn't really matter. Is that after a while it becomes a bit of a dead conversation. It's that's not a relationship. That's just basically you just trying to push for as much as you can get. And while that you may get a good deal out of it, I sort of sense that basically after a while, you're crying wolf, that basically saying, oh, we can't afford this. It's like, well, if I was a supplier, I'd say, this is not in my long-term interest to stay with this company, because they're constantly going to be basically querying and I can't base my financial future around it.
Yeah, no, agrees. I think the other thing that crops up is, if you're being pressured by your customers to reduce your price, and obviously then having to pass that back onto a supplier, it's the kind of arguments that come up around, well, if you're looking for a top quality product with top quality either components or the things that feed into that, you've got to pay for it. If you want a cheaper alternative, we can look at that, but it's not going to deliver what you need. The value's not going to be there. Or actually, if you can't afford what we do, then suggest you move on to someone else and come back when you've been unhappy with a poor quality service or product. How do you feel having those conversations should go, Colin? I know it's different for every business, but constant.
But the idea of going on to somebody else, when you phone your supplier, you shouldn't say, I want a 20% discount. You go to the BMW garage and say, I want a 20% discount because here's the Mercedes price list and they're 20% cheaper.
Yeah.
It's a factual argument, not a subjective argument.
Yeah.
Name their competitors, and as soon as they get wind of the fact that you are talking to their competitors, then they're going to take you a bit more seriously.
Yeah, no, 100%. 100%. I think that's a great tip, is actually do your homework before you go into that conversation, because otherwise it is just subjective. But actually, if you've got facts, then that really helps, for sure. Any final tips? Just kind of wrapping this up, and we're talking cost control tips around that and cost management as well. Phil, if you were going to give any business leader one top tip on that subject, what would you pass on or suggest?
To me, it comes just back to the information to begin with. I mean, there are so many different tool sets now. When your data is into Zero, that you can, or QuickBooks or QuickBooks or other systems where you can access the information. I think that's a starting point, because if you've got then ability to be able to look in things into a bit more detail, that allows you to make factual decisions. Is this margin on this product working? Is this margin on this service working? Can I that's a starting point, I think. And then, as I say, with various tool sets now, you've got the ability to be able to drill down and show you stuff that's really important, and allows you to prioritize what's important, what's not.
I guess on that, if you're running a business and you're thinking, well, my finance team just isn't providing that, or no one's providing that level of info, that's what's got to change, right? If the leader of the business has never asked for that kind of info, or whoever is responsible for that particular department or the operational side of the business, if you just never ask for it, the chances are finance have never probably provided it, or don't even know how to provide it. And that's, I guess, where you need to be asking for more, demanding more, to make sure you're getting the right info to then make those informed decisions. Colin, any final top tips?
For me, cost cutting is a team effort. The finance department will just chop regardless, and the marketing department will never chop. And it's a dialogue between the two. There's somewhere in the middle, there is something sensible, but either one of those departments by themselves are not going to do a good job. The dream of the doer, the cynic. Get those three people in the room.
Yeah, no, understood. That's great. Well, look, guys, great tips, great thoughts on that. Thank you for joining this conversation on the topic, and I look forward to talking to you on another topic at some point. So thank you.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about the topics discussed in this podcast, then you can find us on our website at moveyourbusinessforward.com.